I'm just now noticing that I've been talking about the Nets game as Harden's Clippers debut. That is not correct. Debuted against the Knicks and his second game with the team came against the Nets. So I just want to clarify that I've confused those two. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of It's a Bird, It's a Plane. No, it is the pass that James Harden
Bruh.
threw to Iron Eagle in his Los Angeles Clippers debut. As always, I'm your host, Zach Cronin, and today we are talking about just that. Not necessarily James Harden's Clippers debut, but his tenure with the Clippers overall, which obviously encompasses his debut with the team. Now, I'm probably the second, third, maybe the fourth person to make a video on this. It is a very underground topic that definitely not tens of thousands of people have talking about before because it is just such a mind-boggling way to show up with a new team, but we're going to talk about it today. We're going to dive into it. We're going to also discuss potentially some optimism about the Clippers turning it around, but just to get everything out of the way, I once again have my handy dandy notebook here with a bunch of my notes. Since James Harden debuted with the Clippers over this 5 game stretch, they have been arguably the worst team in basketball. They have an offensive rating of 108.2, a defensive rating of 118.5, which gives them a net rating of about minus 10.2. Those are 27th, 25th, and 29th in the league, respectively. This team has looked like shit since Harden came over. I don't think there's any other way to sugarcoat it. It has been in unmitigated disaster. Trying to integrate James Harden into this offense has been like trying to fit a tractor trailer under a bridge on a local highway. It's not happening. It's making a mess. It is causing an unnecessary ruckus that I think is actually entirely avoidable. In some of the videos I've watched, they've mentioned, I'm talking about Kenny Beecham in particular. He mentioned how when he watches the Clippers, it looks as though they are trying, all of the other Clippers like PG and Kawhi, they're trying to change their games to fit Harden's play style instead of the other way around. I think that's actually a very good assessment of this Lakers team. From everything that I've watched of them, they do look different. I'm not so sure it is the Clippers trying to change their play style. I think it includes a little bit of that, but overall, I think it's just they don't know how to play alongside James Harden at this point. And I don't think there's been anybody in the locker room that has stepped to James Harden and said that you need to find where you fit in the system. We are not going to try to fit. We are not going to try to change our system around you, which is something that Tyronn Lue should say, which is something that Kawhi Leonard should say, which is something that Paul George should say. Because listen, James Harden is still a very good basketball player, and he's been giving them decent production relative to how bad this team has been. But when he is not involved in the offense, the team looks like he's not there at all. Another thing to consider is that since James Harden came over, every single one of the major rotation players has a negative net rating. All of them. Kawhi, PG, Zubats, Westbrook. The only guy who's close to having a positive net rating is Terrence Mann, and he's at minus zero point 0.6. As the old saying goes, if it's everybody else, it's you. The problem is James Harden right now. The problem is that he brings a dynamic that does not suit the Clippers. He is a ball dominant player. He's a very good playmaker, as he's shown over the last couple of years, but he still requires the ball in his hands to be effective. He's never been one to play well off the ball. He is never really been one to cut through the defense. He's never really been one to spot up, even though like spotting up has been a very reliable part of his game. He just doesn't do it enough. But that is the role that he needs to occupy with this Clippers team. To further evidence this, before Harden came over, the Clippers had a net rating of about 114, 115, and a defensive rating of about 108. Since he's come over, their offense has dropped to 104, and their defense has risen to 126, just about 125.8. Again, if it's everybody else, it's you. Another thing is that the 5 man lineup, the starting lineup that Harden is playing alongside, has a net rating of negative 14 in 58 minutes that they've played together. Paul George has taken his addition particularly hard, and I think that it's good to focus on Paul George because Kawhi is still Kawhi. He may not be putting up the volume that we're used to seeing, but before the Harden arrival and after the Harden arrival, he's been more or less the same, averaging between like 19 and 21 points, shooting around 45% from the field. Paul George looks like two entirely different players, going from shooting like 55% from the field to 38% from the field. So something else that I find particularly interesting is the Harden effect on Paul George. Since the trade, Harden has taken the ball out of Paul George's hands, not so much in the sense of like taking field goals away from him or taking shot attempts away from him, but just the style of shot that Paul George is getting. The most notable indicator is that since Harden came over, in the 5 games since Harden has come over, 51.5% of his shots have been assisted. Prior to that, only about 36% of his shot makes had been assisted. That is a very massive jump for a player to make mid season. We've seen Paul George play secondarily to guys throughout his career. We've seen him be the focal point for teams throughout his career. And I think that I'm fixating hardest on Paul George because he is the player who's going to take this team to the postseason should they make it there. Him and Kawhi have a very similar relationship to me as like LeBron James and Anthony Davis do. Anthony Davis will take the Lakers to the playoffs and to a championship because he's going to need to give that extra production to LeBron. He's going to have to be the guy at times to LeBron. Paul George is very similar, and except his LeBron James is Kawhi Leonard. They're going to need Paul George to be the guy. They're going to need Paul George to take over games. They're going to need Paul George to carry them throughout the end of the season and into the playoffs should they make it. Adding Harden to this fucks that up considerably, and it's noticeable. I have one play here in particular that really stands out to me. I understand that like you really can't take anything away from one play, but I think that it perfectly encapsulates the difference in this team when Harden is involved in the offense and when Harden is not. Harden is over here in on the weak side corner. The offense starts with Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Zubats. Zubats sets a screen on George's man. George cuts, he comes up, sets a screen on Kawhi's man, and then once again receives the ball at the top of the key or at the top of the three-point line, tacks off the dribble, and finishes. This is a fantastic finish by Paul George. I don't want that to get lost in the shuffle, but just run this set, just watch this set again without my commentary. It is a beautifully constructed and a beautifully executed set.
Here's Leonard at about 21 points a game. Westbrook is on top. The taller and longer Porter on him. Slithering is George down the lane. And
punctuated by a beautiful finish. These types of sets are good for teams to run because getting the defense moving, forcing the defense to communicate, forcing defenders to switch, to make them, to have them keep their heads on a swivel. This is how you kind of coax teams into making mental lapses. Now, Denver is a very good defense, and they're not going to make those types of mental errors. But at the end of the day, you have the ball in arguably your best player's hands, and you're like, make a play. You put him in a great position. He was able to get the step on Aaron Gordon, and he finished with a wonderful little finger roll over Nikola Jokic. You're not really going to get those types of sets when James Harden is involved in the action because that is not the style that he plays. For the majority of his career, he's been a heavy pick and roll and isolation player. That is the Harden brand. High pick and roll and isolation. That is effectively where he's going to score like 90 to 95% of his points. And to his credit, it's worked out quite well for him, but that's not going to work with the Clippers team. It's clear after these 5 games, he cannot play with the starting lineup. And I think that is the only fix that will prevent this season for the Clippers from spiraling out of control. And I actually managed to find some numbers to back up this statement. This is a small sample size alert. I'm going to make that abundantly clear. However, this lineup right here, James Harden, Paul George, Norman Powell, Ivica Zubac, and Terrence Mann, has a net rating of plus 6.3, albeit they've only played 7 minutes together. There is also this lineup right here: Paul George, Westbrook, Tucker, Westbrook, Harden, George, and Kawhi, which has a net rating of plus 26. I feel that this is definitely inflated. This one is a little bit more reliable, at least to extrapolate, because systematically it makes more sense. I don't think that at any point in time, Kawhi, Russ, PG, and Harden will ever be able to coexist because Harden's impact on the offense is too grand. As if I haven't dropped enough numbers on you, prior to the Harden trade, the Clippers were averaging about 270 passes per game or so, give or take around that number. Since then, they've dropped to 236. That is a seismic shift. That is significantly fewer, significantly less movement on offense, both in terms of player and ball movement. I think it's much more likely that Harden runs with the second unit alongside Terrence Mann and Norman Powell, potentially even Paul George and Kawhi at some point, because that gives him a little bit more liberty to be himself on offense, which is what this team needs when Kawhi and Paul George aren't on the floor. Additionally, there is a little bit more absorption of him on defense as well with someone like Terrence Mann and Paul George. However, yeah, I really don't think that holds much. I really don't think that holds much water because the Clippers are going to be they're not going to be a good defensive team with Harden on the court at all. So I think they might as well just cut their losses and only focus on defense when he's off the court. But I think the only way that the Clippers are going to be able to salvage this season is to move Harden to the bench. That may not be the role that he wants to play, but it's going to have to be but it's the role that he needs to play. He has been through what, three teams in 4 seasons, four teams in 4 seasons. Everywhere he's gone, he's been unhappy. And he's gone to two great situations in Brooklyn and Philly, and now is entering a third decent situation. He has to adjust at some point. Someone needs to step up to him. Maybe it's Kawhi Leonard. This is the same dude who, Paul George loves to tell the story of when Brian Shaw made them run after airballing, and this is the same guy who's like, "I'm not running. It's basketball. I'm a airball again." He needs to go to James Harden and say, "James, you're gonna rock with the bench unit. That's how we win." Because that's how they're going to win. The starting unit will flow significantly better. They will flow like the team that has all this chemistry already. And then Harden can be himself with the second unit. Additionally, you do still have that scoring and playmaking threat with Harden on the floor in the second unit. It needs to come to this. I know that Tyronn Lue said that, give them 10 games before you start assessing the situation, but they don't have these 10 games. The Western Conference is densely populated with talent. You have the Dallas Mavericks who look incredible right now. You of course have the Denver Nuggets, you have the Lakers, you have the Kings, you have the Houston Rockets now. Suddenly, like, there is no time to wait around and see if things get better. It's been 5 games. You've lost all 5 of these games. They do not resemble themselves prior to the trade. Harden has to move to the bench. That is the only way this is going to work. And even still, there is no guarantee that it does work because who's to say that Harden doesn't become disgruntled with this team after if they do ask him to move to the bench? I mean, that is still a possibility, but regardless, it's a move that has to happen, regardless of if the Clippers want to do it or not. Because statistically, you watch these games as well. He does not gel with the starting lineup. He does not gel with the other four starters that have been there already. Terrence Mann, I think that Terrence Mann should be starting in his place. You could even make the case for, you could make the case for literally anybody to be starting in James Harden's place right now. I think it's best served to be Terrence Mann with Harden handling the second unit, but it has to be done, and it has to be done soon if the Clippers don't want to fall too far out of playoff contention. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out this video. Thank you guys so very much for coming to hang out with me today. As always, everything I'm associated with is down in the description box below. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Comment as well. It really helps out with the algorithm. And with that, I'll catch y'all on the next one.